So hi everyone, we'll just give it a few minutes whilst people keep joining. We'll aim to start on the hour.
Okay, I think we'll start now. Hello and welcome to the second of the two special ESG Bites dedicated to the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or as you'll hear us refer to it today, CSRD. As you may know, ESG Bites is corporate citizenship series of webinars aimed at unwrapping a trending topic and laying out a smorgasbord of sustainability insights. So whether you join us over breakfast, lunch or dinner, we hope you find something here to feed the mind and hopefully inspire action. My name is David Thatcher. I'm a director at Corporate Citizenship, part of SLR Consulting. Next slide, please, Deanna. My co-pilot on this journey of discovery is Rosanna Greenwood, who's also presented on our recent webinar on double materiality and CSRD. But don't worry if you didn't catch that. We shall recap on some of it during this webinar. And this session really moves the narrative on from that ESG Bites and asks the questions, if you've undertaken a double materiality assessment that's in line with CSRD, what happens next? Based on the topics that are most material to you, what are the disclosure requirements expected for you under CSRD? And how best can you assess whether there is a gap in terms of the data you have and the data you need? Next slide, please. Now let's run through some housekeeping before we start. To avoid background noise, we'll be muting all participants, but do share your questions and comments with us during the webinar in the chat function on the right. And thank you to all of those attendees who posted questions in advance. Hopefully we can address some of those later on. Next slide, please. First, a quick introduction to corporate citizenship. We are part of SLR. We're a global strategy and consulting practice, and we pride ourselves on the wide range of clients and sectors we've worked with. In fact, many of them have been partners of ours for many decades. We have a presence around the world. We're part of a 3,000 people consulting practice which supports clients on their sustainability journeys, from strategy development to strategy implementation. We also consider ourselves industry leaders in ESG indices and ratings, and see our job as helping companies navigate what can appear to be a highly complex landscape. We ensure our clients understand what to measure so they can improve their ESG performance and have greater confidence in their reporting, so making it a more meaningful exercise. And judging from the number of registrations we've had for both this and the previous CSRD webinar, these are questions front of mind, I know, for a lot of you. Next slide, please, and over to you, Rosanna.
Perfect. So as a quick recap, the backdrop to all of this is that the EU has set an ambitious target to be the first carbon neutral economy by 2050. Now, to realise this vision, sustainability reporting is serving as a really critical tool. And as such, CSRD is replacing the non-financial reporting directive, and its scope is far wider and applies to way more companies. So CSRD mandates companies to include disclosures on material topics within the management reports. And as we discussed a couple of weeks ago at the previous webinar, double materiality is a cornerstone of this reporting, and it serves to identify the topics that you'll be reporting against. So to help guide the reporting requirements, CSRD has published a suite of European sustainability reporting standards, which you'll hear us refer to throughout this webinar as ESRS. Now, these ESRSs aim to standardize the way in which you report it, in the way in which you report, and encourage more comprehensive transparency on your material topics. So to ensure that this application is standardized, CSRD also requires an independent assurance And information also needs to be digitally tagged to ensure that the disclosures are as comparable and accessible to as many stakeholders and users of the data as possible. So today we'll be exploring what you're expected to disclose and how you can best prepare. Back to you, David. I think you're on mute, David.
I am. Thank you. Thank you. I think it's fair to say that the road to CSRD compliance will be a long and winding one, and that's why we've chosen to provide some clarity and guidance today. And of course, corporate citizenship can be your trusted advisor on this going forwards. So to help frame the webinar, we thought it'd be interesting to assess the level of awareness of CSRD disclosure requirements out there. Time to get you working with a quick poll, Deanna. We can have the next slide with the questions and the answers. Okay, so the question really is asking, how familiar are you with what the ESRS disclosure requirements entail for your company? So if you can look at the answers here, we know which standards apply and how to disclose. We know which standards apply but are unsure of next steps. We've started the double materiality, which, as Rosanna said, is the cornerstone of CSRD. We've yet to start a double materiality. So we're really gauging where you are on that journey, your familiarity with the ESRS disclosures and where you are on that path. We know which standards apply and how to disclose. We know which standards apply but are unsure of next steps. We've started the double materiality. We've yet to start a double materiality. So hopefully the results will be coming through. And if you did join the previous webinar, you may see that some of these questions are moving on from that, which was very much aimed at trying to assess whether companies had even contemplated what's entailed in a double materiality assessment. Here we're going a bit further, trying to assess and gauge your knowledge of the disclosure requirements in those ESRS standards, as Rosanna outlined. Okay. Have we got the results yet? Here we go. Okay, so that's interesting. Rosanna, I mean, I think perhaps quite a few, well, a third of organisations haven't yet begun double materiality. Interesting to compare that with the poll findings from 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Quite a few have actually begun the journey, but there's definitely a drop off here in terms of what happens next, which is great because that's the very purpose of this webinar. Organisations trying to understand what the next steps are, and really a very low number, which perhaps isn't to be expected, is to be expected of organisations that have gone through double materiality, become familiar with the ESRS, and are already starting to consider what they need to disclose. Any surprises from what you read there, Rosanna?
No, I think that's kind of what we're expecting based on what clients are asking. I suppose those that have started the double materiality, hopefully when that assessment's finished, they'll soon be at a point where they're moving into the knowing which standards are going to apply and thinking about next steps and getting to a point of working towards disclosure. Yeah, so to be expected, I think, David.
Yeah.
So I move on to the, oh, sorry.
Yeah, let's say 20% of you really are looking for some advice on standards themselves, what to apply, how they can help you. So really, that's exactly what the purpose of this webinar is. So, yeah.
Great. So on the next slide, we've kind of broken down the process to ESRS compliance into 5 steps that you can see there. Our last webinar, we spoke kind of in detail about the double materiality assessment, and we explained how a CSRD aligned double materiality is slightly different to a classic double materiality. And then we went on to explore how you can use a materiality threshold to assess the topics that are material and therefore should be disclosed. So once these first 2 steps are complete, that you should be able to see here, yeah, double materiality assessment and topic identification, you'll then be in a position where you have a list of material topics that you'll then need to disclose. So during the session, we're going to kind of be exploring a bit more about the information you're expected to report if a topic is to be disclosed, so that's whether it's compulsory or material and therefore disclosed. So before we get started, we're just going to quickly recap on the topics that you'll be assessing during your materiality assessment. On the next slide, you'll see the topical standards that CSRD outline, and during your double materiality assessment, you'll be working with stakeholders to understand whether these sector agnostic topics, such as pollution, consumers, business conduct, are material to your company. Now, it's worth noting that climate change and own workforce are compulsory to most companies and therefore should be disclosed. You'll also work with stakeholders to identify entity-specific topics that are material to your company. So, for example, if you're a pharma company, that might be product safety, or if you're an insurance company, it could be responsible underwriting. Now, once you've got to a point of having identified your material topics, you'll be then thinking about reporting. So if you've already started investigating what CSRD expects you to report, on the next slide, you'll probably be familiar with these papers. If you've come across the EFRAG website, you'll see that there are 12 downloadable papers that are pretty lengthy and kind of seemingly impenetrable on first glance. So we're going to spend a bit of time talking through the documents so that they seem a little less daunting. Okay, on the next slide, please, Diana. CSRD breaks down into kind of two key reporting areas. We've got general disclosures and then topic-specific disclosures. General disclosures, referred to as ESRS2 on the left, are organisational-wide and relate to your top-line processes and structures. And that's in contrast to the topic-specific disclosures on the right, that are those that are specific to your material topics, such as climate change or pollution. These general disclosures on topic-specific disclosures are all underpinned by the general reporting principles, which are outlined in ESRS1, aspects of which are displayed along the bottom. Now, ESRS1 outlines the process and principles that you should be adopting throughout your disclosure process. And it covers the areas that we spoke about in our last webinar, such as conducting a double materiality assessment and assessing your value chain and ensuring that your process is assurable, as well as information relating to the preparation and the presentation of your report. So first we'll talk about the general disclosures on the left. Here, CSRD encourages you to report information relating to your organisational-wide approach to sustainability. So the disclosures are split into three areas, which cover how your sustainability matters are governed, including reporting structures, incentive schemes, and how you approach sustainability due diligence. Regarding strategy, CSRD is looking for information on your value chain analysis and the process that sits behind your stakeholder engagement. And then IRO, so impact, risk and opportunity management, covers disclosures on your double materiality process and asks you to list the topics that you'll be disclosing against. Now we'll move on to the topic specific disclosures. Now this is what we can go on to the previous slide actually, Diana. We'll talk through an example in a second. This is what will make up the bulk of your reporting. All topic disclosures are built on 4 reporting areas: governance, strategy, IRO management, and metrics and targets. It's worth noting that for the entity-specific topics, the ones that you'll identify through your materiality assessment, that you should aim to create disclosures that align with this framework. Now, for those of you who are familiar with TCFD, you'll be aware of this framework and will be pleased to know that the climate topic standards have significant overlap with your TCFD disclosure. And in a moment, we'll talk through an example which will kind of bring this to life a bit. So to recap, your disclosures fall into 2 main areas: general disclosures, organisational wide, and then topic specific disclosures that are aligned to this governance, strategy, IRO management, and metrics and targets framework. So these 2 disclosures areas are then complemented by the general reporting principles, which aren't explicit disclosure requirements, but they instead serve as a kind of guiding principles that will underpin your reporting. So on the next slide, please, Diana, we've just outlined some of the top line kind of disclosures that are included within the climate change topic. So you'll see that it follows the same 4 pillars that we outlined on the previous slide. And regarding governance, they're looking for information relating to integration of your sustainability related metrics into incentive schemes. So for example, that might be that your incentive schemes align with the meeting of your GHG targets, for example. For strategy, this manifests as information relating to the interaction between climate change and your business, specifically the way that climate change might impact your longer term business strategies. And similarly, they're looking for transition plans for climate change mitigation that take into consideration the potential impacts that climate change might have on your business and your business strategy. IRO management looks at the policies related to climate change mitigation and adaptation, as well as actions and resources related to these policies. Now, the last pillar, metrics and targets, is where your quantitative disclosures sit, where the bulk of your reporting will be. So many of you will be familiar with these disclosures and will likely already report a lot of them. So that will be ones like your targets, your scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, and your energy consumption. However, it's worth noting that there are a lot more ambitious disclosures that might not yet be on your radar, such as internal carbon pricing or the financial impacts of physical or transition risk of climate change. So similarly, when we look at other topical standards, there are, again, more challenging disclosures, such as targets relating to resource use and circular economy, as well as resource inflow and outflow data. So it's no surprise that there's overlaps with reporting frameworks that you're probably familiar with, such as GRI, SASB, and ISSB. But it's important to start early to understand where your data collection and reporting gaps will be. So David's now going to talk in a little bit more detail about how you can best prepare for the disclosure. I think you might be on mute. Oh, you're off. Perfect.
Thanks again, Deanna. Thanks, Rosanna. So I think, as Rosanna said, really the key point to remember here is when preparing for your disclosures, it's really essential to start early. We can't emphasize that enough. CSRD covers a broad range of topics, and as such, data will come from all parts of your organization. So this is not the time now for silos of ownership of data. All teams need to be collaborating, pointing in the same direction, working to the same script. There will be some data under CSRD, as Rosanna said, that you are already curating for other purposes. As we mentioned earlier, much of what you need to for your climate change disclosure on the CSRD will already exist in your environmental and TCFD reporting. But by understanding this, identifying the commonalities, what's in the public domain, what you may hold privately, and what's not being currently collected, all that will ensure that you can focus your efforts where it matters most. So engaging your content and data owners in good time will be central to a comprehensive disclosure strategy. And because this is an annual process, streamlining your data collection will reduce the heavy resource lift across the whole organization. You also need to factor in enough time for third-party assurance and digitizing the report. And again, that shows why it's so essential to begin your CSRD journey as soon as possible. Some of you will be reporting under CSRD in 2025 using financial year 2024 data. So as we approach the midpoint in 2023, the countdown has probably already started and is getting louder and louder in your head. But even those of you impacted by CSRD later are advised to start beginning the planning process now. The quicker you understand what topics are material to you via the double materiality process, the quicker you can identify what disclosure requirements apply, the quicker you can assess what data you already have and also what data you need and whether it's better data you need. And that will then spark conversations internally about how you need to work together and close those gaps. And it may also spark conversations you need to have externally about the support you need to plan the path ahead. So I think we have time maybe for some questions. So I think, was there one that, Rosanna, you've got there?
Yeah, so there's one here relating to how frequently a double materiality assessment should be conducted. So our general guidance is that a double materiality assessment should take place like every 3 years. However, CSRD do encourage you to review your material topics annually, considering kind of your business context, whether there's any changes in your value chain, any new stakeholder groups that you should be considering the opinions of. So while we say every 3 years, we'd encourage you to kind of refresh your matrix annually, just to ensure that your material topics are up to date and accounting for kind of any key business context changes, any broader horizon changes as well.
Okay, again, I think it's important to emphasize if an organization's already sitting on a double materiality exercise that is not being designed under the commitments that CSRD lays down, then it needs to be brought into line with that.
Yeah, that's a good point actually. So yeah, even if you've conducted a double materiality assessment last year, we'd encourage you to refresh it in line with the CSRD requirements to ensure that if you're reporting in 2025, you can take into consideration the changes in the methodologies. Yeah,
I think the CSRD reporting requires organisations to sort of demonstrate the process they underwent and some of the outputs and some of the decisions that take as a result of that, particularly with regard to the entity-specific standards and reporting, as you said. Another question we've got come through here is, I'd like to know how we find out which organisations CSRD will apply to, and also how it aligns to the plethora of new frameworks and standards that are on the horizon, such as ISSB. And we made a reference to that, but we can expand on that in more detail. In terms of which organisation CSRD applies to, earlier on in the presentation, and obviously a recording of this will be made available afterwards, so you'll be able to look at that particular slide. But when Rosanna went through those 5 stages in that kind of circular wheel process, you may have seen the QR code. We have at Corporate Citizenship put together what we call a CSRD impact tree. So by looking at that, you can identify if you're based in the EU, when CSRD will apply, but also, and it's important to remember, if you're HQ'd outside the EU, but you have significant operational footprint within the EU, CSRD may very well apply to you at some point. And the CSRD impact trees we've developed, available through that QR code, will help you understand exactly the if, the when, and the how. So that's something to look out for as well. In terms of the alignment, I mean, this is something that we read about a lot. We're tracking all this all the time, as I'm sure some of you are as well. It can be really confusing. There's definitely been a real effort from EFRAG, which is, as Rosanna said, the EU-appointed standard setter for CSRD. So it's EFRAG that have been developing and designing those ESRS standards that were then put out for wider consultation last year as well. Definitely a really concerted effort there from EFRAG to make sure that CSRD as a process is not a wholly new set of actions that organisations have to consider, and therefore things like terminology, certainly in response to the consultation that went out last year, has been tightened up to make sure that there is greater alignment with existing frameworks. And as Rosanna said many times, just to emphasise again, those within TCFD are all there within the reporting structure of the CSRD as well. And more broadly, I think the question mentioned ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. That again launched at COP26 in 2021, very active last year, producing drafts, still considering the outputs that follow as a result of those consultations. But certainly what we're picking up on is a very strong ambition there to make sure there's alignment there, not just with, say, TCFD, because the ISSB standards are at the moment focused on climate, but also GRI, for example. Lots of conversations about making sure that terminology and structure and process aligns with GRI. So if organisations are already reporting under that, the ISSB standards, designed as global baselines, are not seen as anything too much of a shock. The other thing to comment on there is this organisation, ISSB. The parent of that is the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation, and that has brought together organisations like SASB and also CDP. So, like I said before, a real ambition there to try and make sure there's greater alignment and harmonisation. There's still no one single reporting framework, but definitely as I said before, the ambition to make sure that everything is more pointing in the right direction. So I think as we draw to a close, that's probably all the time we've got for questions right now.
There was just one more question, David. Have you seen the next version of ESRS? If yes, can you share the link? So the last ones were published end of last year, and we're expecting them to be finalised in June this year. We don't expect there to be huge changes around the methodologies, but instead some clarification around some of the pointers in ESRS, so especially around the definition of the threshold and a couple of other aspects. So while that's not been published yet, we're kind of running on the assumption that there'll be some tweaks, but not a big overhaul.
Yeah, and that's a nice lead into what I was going to say by way of closing, actually. So we hope that the ESG Bites webinar today has given you plenty of food for thought about CSRD. Given the step change that many organisations will need to take now, corporate citizenship will be hosting future webinars on CSRD and may well actually address the point you made, Rosanna, and producing more guidance. So do watch out for those. If you registered for this event, then obviously you'll be receiving information from us about CSRD in future. So in summary, the road to readiness starts now, and we're right here beside you. So thanks again for watching, and wishing you a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good evening wherever you are. Thank you again. And thanks, Rosanna, and thanks, Deanna.
Bye.